Hi, this is Jay Folk reporting my last screencast in Unit 15 for ATM 101. And this week it's all about the climate and the weather at Eagle, Alaska. And I'm just going to go over the 7 questions that were posed to us for this week's screencast. All right, so I'm going to start with the first question. How does the change in seasons affect the daily temperature range? And also discuss the difference in the day to night variations in temperature in January, February, and March. So looking at January and February, you can see that it has a consistent kind of a low temperature at night, then it dips back up for when the sunlight's hitting Eagle every afternoon. It gets warm in the afternoons just for a slight period of time, just because we don't have, or Eagle doesn't have a lot of sunlight in January and February. This is largely due to the orbital tilt of the Earth at this time of year. Since Eagle is in the northern hemisphere, it is tilted away from the sun, signifying the winter months for January and February, while the southern hemisphere is experiencing summer. The temperature ranges in January and February between the 25th of January and February 2nd. You can see it was extremely cold, well below the averages for the climatology in Eagle. And it dips as cold as -45 below here in an early morning on Monday, -43 here on Tuesday and Wednesday night, or Tuesday night, Wednesday morning. The pattern of warmer days and colder nights holds pretty constant through the 7 or 8 days here, and it was very cold in Eagle in January and February. Now looking at March, it was kind of the opposite. January and February were quite colder than the climatological averages, and in March they were actually a little higher, but it still followed the same trend of warmer days and colder nights all throughout March. You can see here, nighttime gets cold, early morning's cold, afternoon when the sun hits, it gets warmer. And this is also due to the orbital tilt of the Earth. It is not so dramatic in March, where we're receiving more sunlight in Eagle than we were in January and February. And but as you can see, at nighttime it does, or it can dip fairly cold. The range was quite a bit during March, and the warm sun was able to warm it up well past 40 and almost up to 50 throughout this week, but it also was as cold as around 7 or 8. For the second question, it says, based on your analysis, if the temperatures are warmer than climatology, does this represent clear skies or cloudy skies? And looking at this March 24th map, this particular day was well above the climatological averages, which for this day was 27 degrees, but the actual temperature for this day was 42, so it was quite a bit higher than averages, and we can see how clear the skies were on March 24th. So I would say that if the temperature is warmer than the climatology average, then I think it generally looks like clear skies or clear conditions on this weather map. And it was quite a bit warmer. We had some clouds roll in the next few days, but it also wasn't as warm or above the climatology average like this day was. Question number 3, based on your analysis, how do the changes in temperature and humidity reflect the changes in weather and movement of different air masses? And it also says, please highlight differences in the variations of dew point and relative humidity. So if we look at March 26th here on this weather map, this day the relative humidity dropped by right around 25% from the 24th of March, just 2 days earlier, and the temperature increased with that drop in relative humidity. This caused of cloudy conditions for this day over Eagle, and also warmer than normal temperatures due to clouds trapping the heat in Eagle right here. And So based on my analysis, I think that as the relative humidity dropped, it increased the temperature, causing some cloud cover, which then trapped the heat over Eagle. Question number 4, are the satellite measurements of humidity consistent with the station measurements? And do the days with station measurements of higher humidity correlate with brighter shades on the corresponding satellite image? So yes, I do believe they are consistent with each other. If we look at March 24th, the skies, if we can remember on the second question, we saw the weather map of how clear the skies were on March 24th. The relative humidity rises to nearly 90%, right around 88 to 89% during the late afternoon, or sorry, the late morning to early afternoon, and then it falls in the evening to as low as around 40%, rising up again right around that 87, 88% mark. Then just to fall again in the afternoon to evening to as low as 30%. And on the evening of the 25th to the morning of the 26th, we can see that the relative humidity and the dew point kind of come to a point here and meet for a few hours, which could indicate a possible precipitation scenario, and would also explain the heavy cloud cover that we had on the 26th on this day. And also, I'm going to show you just in one second though the satellite, the water vapor satellite map also does show an indication of a possible precipitation scenario. So if we look at the water vapor map for March 26th, well, we can see that the shades are brighter on the map, possibly indicating the possible precipitation that was over Eagle that day. And so you can kind of see, you can actually really see how heavy the cloud cover was over Eagle on the 26th of March. And here's the TV weather map for that same day on March 26th, showing the cloud cover over Eagle and showing the possible precipitation that day. Question number 5, based on your analysis, how do the winds explain the observed weather? Discuss how prevailing winds might influence the climate. When we look at January 25th, 29th, and 31st, we can see by looking at the 25th to start, the winds have a southeasterly flow, and that brings fog and clouds into Eagle. And by the 29th, a high pressure system has moved into the area from the prevailing winds, bringing cold weather with it to Eagle in the late January. The wind continues to bring in 2 other high pressure systems on January 31st, where the weather starts to warm up. The wind can influence, or the prevailing winds can definitely influence climate because it brings warm and cold air masses, in and out of certain areas, just like Eagle. So the prevailing winds do have quite an impact on climatology. Question number 6, based on your analysis, explain the meteorological conditions that gave rise to colder than expected temperatures in Eagle in late January. Suggest what meteorological conditions would give rise to typical temperatures in Eagle in late January. So we know that January was a colder month than the climatology average. We know that because of this chart. It clearly shows how cold the month was. It rarely even got up to the averages. Actually, it never really did, except for on the 25th for a brief moment. So it was a very cold month. The pressure system that was coming from the north accompanied the cloud cover, or was accompanied with cloud cover on the 29th. It brings cold air into Eagle from the prevailing winds, and with that on top of that, the orbital tilt of the Earth at this time during the season was tilted primarily away from the sun. Very little sunlight coming to Eagle. All of these factors really caused extremely low temperatures in Eagle in January, especially how cold they were, much lower than climatology averages. During this cold snap in Eagle, the air pressure did steadily rise as the temperature went down, and the relative humidity actually stayed fairly constant for this. So here we can see the pressure. It did steadily rise, dips a little bit, but on average, it really rose all the way until the weather kind of started warming back up here. So you can see, starting on the 25th, the temperatures are dropping, pressure rising, and as the pressure drops back down, the temperature starts coming back up. And when we look at the relative humidity, it stayed fairly constant throughout the month. Didn't move a whole lot, not like it did in March, that's for sure. Question number 7. So question number 7, it says, based on your analysis, explain the meteorological conditions that gave rise to warmer than expected temperatures in Eagle in late March. Suggest what meteorological conditions would give rise to typical temperatures in Eagle in late March. So we know that March was a little warmer than climatology averages. It's largely due to the orbital tilt of the Earth. Like I've said before, the orbital tilt is not so dramatic away from the sun. You're getting more sunlight in Eagle. And when we look at the 24th here, sunlight was obviously able to penetrate straight into Eagle with how clear the skies were. So on the 24th, it was getting intense heat from the sun while they were having their daylight, which was definitely greater than it was in January and February. When we look at the 26th here, get it up, there we go. All right, so the 26th, clouds moved in over Eagle, which then trapped that heat that they received on the 24th, which then warmed Eagle up even more, which I think was a primary factor in it being actually warmer than the climatology averages for March. This also continued on the 28th right here. Cloudy conditions, heat still being trapped. And also another another thing I want to point out on these maps is that starting back here on March 24th, there's a low pressure system down here in the North Atlantic that's pushing the warm air up that eventually hits Eagle, and that also contributes to the warmer than average air temperatures in Eagle in March. And so that concludes my screencast. I've enjoyed the class. I feel like I can navigate my way through a weather map and understand the basics. So it's going to come in handy when I take off on my snow machine trips from now on. Thanks.